We're back to verb conjugations, and today it's binyan hitpa'el. Shalom and welcome back to Hebrew Grammar Help. I'm Sapir, and today I'm going to be talking about the conjugations for binyan, hitpa'el, gizrat hashlemim. And gizrat hashlemim is always the regular conjugations of any binyan. Hitpa'el is generally thought of as the reflexive binyan, and so many verbs are either reflexive in the sense that it is a person doing something to themselves, or it is a person, like two people doing it to each other, like corresponding or getting married, stuff like that. But it doesn't have to be. The verb lahitga'gea means to miss somebody, and it is not reflexive. It does not mean we miss each other. You can say ani mitga'gea elaich, I miss you, and that just means I miss you. You don't have to miss me back. So I'll be going through the past, the present, and the future tenses and the imperative mood. So this is my 5th video on verb conjugations, but you don't have to have seen all of those other videos, and you don't have to know anything else about those other binyanim in order to understand this video. But if you are new or new-ish to Hebrew verbs, or if it's been a while since you've studied Hebrew verbs, you might want to check out these 4 videos. G7 is shorashim, G8 is verbs, the basics, G9 is verb tenses, and G11 is recognizing binyanim. And so just watching these videos first might give you that refresher that you need, or it might give you the basics to understanding what I'm even talking about here. So when we learn verbs, we basically learn the various templates that the shoresh letters are going to fit into. And the templates have a lot of similarities. When they're, for present tense, they're all kind of similar. Past tense, they're all kind of similar to each other. Future tense, they all kind of are similar to each other. So here's the infinitive template for hitpa'el verbs. Infinitive is the form of the verb that we generally cannot use this form of the verb on its own in a sentence. Usually an infinitive verb will come after a conjugated verb, or it's also can be the form of the verb that when we ask, oh, how do you say such and such, the answer will usually be in this particular form, the infinitive. In English, we say the infinitive usually with a to in front of it. So to see, to miss, to get dressed, to approach, stuff like that. Hitpa'el verbs are really, really obvious because they almost always have a taf somewhere right there at the beginning. There's usually another letter, or in the infinitive here we've got 2 letters, but there's another letter before it, and then a taf right there at the beginning before all of the rest of the shoresh letters. So here's the template for infinitive hitpa'el verbs. And you can see that we have a lamed with a schwa under it, sounds like le. And then we've got a hey with a chirik under it, and then a taf with a schwa under it. So lehit. And almost every hitpa'el verb in the infinitive is going to start out like that. Then what we do is we have these 3 spaces or boxes. We've got a green one, an orange one, and a pink one. And the green, the orange, and the pink stand for the 3 shoresh letters. And you might notice that this first shoresh letter has a dagesh in it, and also a patach under it. And that is a hardening dagesh. this second shoresh letter actually gets a doubling dagesh. Both of these dageshim or dageshes, to a modern Hebrew learner, they are going to have the exact same effect, which is if the letter is a bet, a kaf, or a pei, it's going to make them have that plosive sound, a stop sound. So B, K, or P sound. Whereas without the dagesh, it's going to have a fricative sound. So V, Cha, and an F sound. So for modern Hebrew learners who are not going to be writing with nikud, the important thing is to remember that the first two letters of the shoresh in hitpa'el verbs have that dagesh. They're going to have a dagesh, and so you're going to want to remember to pronounce the bet, the kaf, or the pei as that plosive sound. B, k, and p. Under that second shoresh letter, we have a tsere. It sounds like e. And then we have the last shoresh letter. It doesn't have a dagesh because the last letter of a word never has a dagesh. And it also does not have a vowel, which is also pretty typical. So one of my favorite shorashim to use as an example verb is kaf, taf, bet. So if we put these three letters into position, we get lehitkatev. Lehitkatev. And that means to write to one another, right? Or to correspond. And this means to correspond as in two people who are writing to one another, but it can also mean correspond in the more figurative sense when I say the Israeli Knesset corresponds to the British Parliament, right? So you're saying that it's like they match up in their purpose. All right, so that's how it's done. That's how you make verbs in Hebrew, is that you take a template and you add in your shoresh and you get meaning, right? You had your shoresh of something that means writing or inscribing. You have a template that is an infinitive form of a hitpa'el verb, and you get the meaning of to write to each other. Oh no, folks, my battery died, so I had to move it inside. Sorry for the boring background. All right, so the infinitive is one form, but we also have all of the tenses. We have present, past, and future, and we also have the imperative mood and also the verbal noun, the shem peula. So let's start with the present tense. Present tense always has only four forms. It has masculine and feminine and singular and plural. So it doesn't go by person. The masculine singular form is kind of like the base form, and then the other three forms just get little suffixes. So let's look at this little table. In the top right is going to be the masculine singular. So we're going to have a mem with a chirik under it, and then a taf with a schwa. And so it's going to sound like meat. And then you're going to have the three shoresh letters. The first two are going to have a dagesh inside. That first shoresh letter is going to have a patach underneath, and the second one is going to have a tsere underneath. And in the feminine singular, it's going to be very similar. We're going to have an et suffix. And whenever we do that, that tsere becomes a segol. And in fact, the et suffix also is a segol. So the second shoresh letter gets a segol, and the third shoresh letter also gets a segol, and then we have a taf at the very end. And then the masculine plural is going to have an im suffix on the end. And that im suffix is going to be stressed. And because of that stressed suffix, that sere vowel is going to reduce to a schwa. And then the last shoresh letter gets a chirik, and then we have a yud and a mem sofit. And a very similar thing happens with feminine plural. We have a stressed ot ending, And because of that stressed suffix, again, the second shoresh letter that used to have a tsere, that tsere is going to reduce to a schwa. And then the third shoresh letter is not going to have anything underneath it. What it gets is a chola maleh after it, and then the taf. Okay, so if we add our favorite shoresh letters to all of these, kaf, taf, and bet, we get mit katev, mit katevet, mit katvim, mit katvot. All right, past tense is actually going to have 9 different forms. So I'm going to focus first on what all of the forms in the past tense have in common. And the first thing is that they all have a hit at the beginning, a he with a chirik and then a taf. Then they're all going to have their shoresh letters. And those first 2 shoresh letters, the first one gets a hardening dagesh, if appropriate, and the second one gets a doubling dagesh, if appropriate. And the other thing that these all have in common is that the first shoresh letter has a patach under it. And then they all get their personal past tense suffix. So the only one that does not have any kind of a suffix is third person singular masculine. What changes is, of course, which ending each verb gets, right? The suffixes change by the person. That's how we know what person each verb is. And the other thing that varies by person and gender and number is the vowels that go with the second and the third shoresh letters. So for the first and second persons, all of them are, that second shoresh letter is going to get a patach. And then the third shoresh letter is going to have a schwa. And that is right before whatever the final suffix is. And third person is a little bit different. Third person singular masculine is going to have an a, e vowel pattern. So it's going to have a tsere underneath that second shoresh letter. The third person singular feminine is going to have a schwa under that second shoresh letter, and then a patach under the third one, and then it gets a hey at the end. Now here I've written the third person plural twice, but they're always the same. There's really not a difference between the masculine and the feminine. I just don't know how to make a table where on the singular side there's 2 different forms and on the plural side there's only one. I don't know how to merge those cells. And so for third person plural, it's going to be similar to third person singular feminine in that the vowel on the second shoresh is going to reduce to a schwa, but instead of getting patach under the third shoresh letter, that third shoresh letter is going to get a shuruk at the end, and so it sounds like u at the end, and it's also going to be stressed. So let's put in our kaf taf bet shoresh and pronounce all of these past tense verbs. So we have hitkatavti, hitkatavta, hitkataft, hitkatev, hitkatva, hitkatavnu, hitkatavtem, hitkatavten, and hitkatvu. All right, so that's the past tense. Let's move on to future. So future tense always involves a prefix. So what happens with future tense, with Hitpa'el, is wherever there is in the present tense, there's a mem, or in the past tense, there's a hey. So this is going to be the first letter of whatever the verb is. Instead, in the future tense, you're going to get this personal prefix. And that personal prefix is usually going to have the hirik, just like the hey and the mem do in the other tenses, except for the very first one, the one that has an aleph. So then all of your forms are going to have that taf, Then you're going to have your 3 shoresh letters. And again, the first one is going to have a hardening dagesh if appropriate. The second one is going to have a doubling dagesh if appropriate. And that first shoresh letter is going to have a patach, always, always, always. The second shoresh letter is going to have a tsere, unless there is a suffix as well as the prefix. And if there is a suffix, then that tsere is going to reduce to a schwa. So the forms that are going to have a suffix are going to be second person feminine, and then also the second person plural, and then also the third person plural. So let's go through them with our favorite example shoresh, kaf taf bet. We have ani et katev, ata tit katev, at tit katvi, hu yit katev, he tit katev. Now that's the weird one. In all of the binyanim, in future tense, the he form is always the exact same as the ata form. Always, always, always. All the binyanim, all the gzarot. Okay, moving on. Anachnu nitkatev, atem ve'aten titkatvu, hem vehen yitkatvu. Now, there are separate forms for the feminine plural of the second person and the third person, but it is not really in use today in modern Hebrew. But if you are really interested in those forms, you can go to pe'alim.com and look at them. Because I never use them, I don't like to teach them. All right, moving on to imperative. Now, if you're not sure what imperative is, this is when you're giving a command, telling or asking somebody to do something. It's pretty rare that people actually use the command forms in Hebrew. There's only a handful of verbs where it's really common to use those command forms. For the most part, they will just use the future tense for the correct you person. I always forget to mention this, but when you are making a negative command, like don't correspond with your teacher, it is mandatory that you use the future tense forms. You cannot use the actual imperative forms. You must use the word al and then those 3 forms that I just said. Titkatev, titkatvi, titkatvu. But if you're making a positive command, like please do this, you do have the option to use an actual imperative form. It's just not very common in day-to-day speech. You do see it in writing, but in most day-to-day speech, it's more common to use the future tense. So let's just look at what these 3 templates are going to look like. They basically look like the future tense forms for the 3 types of you person, except that you delete that first taf, the taf that is the prefix for the future tense for you forms, and you replace it with a hey. So if we're doing lehit katev, instead of tit katev, it's going to be hit katev. Instead of tit katvi, it's going to be hit katvi. And instead of tit katvu, it's going to be hit katvu. All right, and then lastly, we've got the Shem Peula. This is what Israelis will usually, when they're speaking Hebrew, will call it a verbal noun. Sometimes it can be what in English is a gerund. It's the ing form when we use it as a noun. So like if I say corresponding with my teacher is fun, right? Corresponding is a verb, right? Because it comes from to correspond. But in that particular sentence, it's a noun because it is the subject of that sentence. What is fun? Corresponding. But it can also be a different kind of a noun. It can be like correspondence. I prefer referring to it as either a Shem Peula or a verbal noun than referring to it as the gerund, because in English a gerund is a very specific form. It always has the ing at the end, and these verbal nouns don't always correspond to the gerund. Shem ha'peula lo tamid mitkatevet lamila gerund. How excited am I that I got to use the word that I've been talking about all video long. Verbal nouns are irregular all the time for no reason at all whatsoever. And so when I tell you this pattern, just know that don't be surprised if you see words that don't actually fit the pattern. So here is the pattern. We've got a hey with a chirik. We've got a taf with a shwa. We've got our 3 shoresh letters. The first 2 have those same degeshim. Your first shoresh letter is going to have a patach. Your second shoresh letter is going to have a shva. And then you have ut at the end. So right after your third shoresh letter, you have a shuruk, and then you have a taf. And because of that ut ending, that especially the fact that there's a taf there at the end, these are all going to be feminine nouns. And so to say corresponding or correspondence, it's hitkatvut. Okay, so that's it. Now you know all of the forms, all of the regular forms of Hitpa'el verbs in the past, the present, the future, and the Shem Poal, which is the infinitive, and Shem HaPeula, which is the verbal noun, and also the imperative mood. As always, if you have any questions or feedback, please leave it in the comments. And especially if you have any aspect of Hebrew grammar that has you flummoxed, leave it in the comments and I will do my best to make a video. Hit like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe and press the notification bell if you want to see more. Lehitraot ba'pa'am haba'a. See you next time.